Daf Samach Gimel Amud Beis will begin Daf Samach Gimel Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the bottom at the beginning of the Gemara. We learned in the Mishnah, Sheikh Nesa Pesach ala Chometz over B'leis Has. Someone shouts Chometz the Pesach and he has Chometz, he's over in a B'leis Has. Zak the Gemara, Amar Mishim ben Lakish, Lo Olam Ein Chayiv Ad She'eh Chometz L'Sheicher L'Zarek. The chametz, who does the chametz belong to? That we say that there is a leisase. The Torah says leisishchan al chametz dam zivchei. So it applies to the one who's doing the avodah. It's a sheichet, the zayrik. The Meir says even the ones who do the other two avodas, the kabbalah and the halacha, and oil echem ibnei chaborim, or anyone else from that chabura. V'achim abazar. But the chiyuv is only if the chametz is in the azara. Then there is the chiyuv. And if chametz belongs to somebody else, it's not part of the one who's doing the voida. It's not part of this chabura. Even if they see chametz, and they're not over. It's only if it's owned by one of these parties. Rav Yochanan Omar, he says, Al pi sheini mo bazar. Rav Yochanan says, no, even if it's not in the azara, as long as they own it, you're chayiv. Yerushalmi qualifies that. He says, however, it's so long as it is within Yerushalayim, even though it's not in the Azar. So, but my kamifically, what's the basis of machlekes Rav Yochanan Rish Lakish? So, ilema ba'al besamach kamiflege. Maybe you'll tell me that the machlekes is based on whether we say al. The pasuk says leisishchat al chametz dam zivchi. What does al mean? Does al mean in close proximity? Does it mean next to it, or near to it, or does it mean even if it's not near to it? Maybe you'll tell me that's the machlekes. Savar al besamach. He says al must be samach. For Rav Yochanan, savar loy be'inan al besamach. Therefore, al does not have to mean near it, even if it's further away. So therefore, if it's not in the azor, Gemara, if that's the case, why would they have to tell us this machlekes? Argue beferish in this case? We would know that. We would know that from inference because they argue in another case, which is al is the basis of the machlekes. This one we learned in the Mishnah. A korban taida is brought with a zavach. A behema that you shechted. It also comes with 40 loaves, 30 of matzah, 10 of chometz. Initially, the chalas have a kedushas domim. A person is makdish, it only has a kedushas domim. It doesn't have a kedushas aguf. But once he shechs the korban, it also has on it a kedushas aguf, a higher level of kedusha. It can be possible with other things, with the yaitze, etc. So, when he sheikhs the taida, if he sheikhs the taida, it's lifnim v'lach machutz l'chayma, but the lechem is outside the walls of the city, like kiddush lechem. So the lechem is not kodesh. My chutz l'chayma. Now we said chutz, we said outside the wall. What does that mean? Rav Yochanan Amar, he says chutz l'chayma's beis pagi. So Rav Yochanan says, as we just translated, it means chutz l'chayma's beis pagi. We consider Beis Pagi, the wall Beis Pagi is the outskirts of Yerushalayim. That's the place, the furthest place where you can eat a kochim kalim is Beis Pagi. So it means is that if the lechem is outside the Beis Pagi, the limits of Yerushalayim, then it's like Kiddush. Then there's no connection to it with the zevach, with the shlit of the zevach. But Rav Yochanan says even if it's outside the walls of the azara, then it's kodesh because you don't need al besamach. It doesn't have to be besamach. The Torah over there says also al. It says the Torah says al chales lechem chometz yaakov karbana al zevach teiv shlama. Over there it also says al. It says al. Rav Yochanan says you don't need al b'samoch, and therefore even if the lechem is not in the azara, the zevach, the shlit of the zevach, will be mekadeshim. Rav Shimon ben Lakish Amar afilu chaymachus l'chaymas azara like kodesh. He says no, even if it's outside the azara, it's not kodesh. Even if it's within Yerushalayim, but if it's outside the azara like kodesh, al mabinan al b'samoch. Therefore, you see that you need al b'samach, that al has to be b'samach. So we see this machlekes over here already. We see that they argue in this case. You can bring a raya from here to the Yerushalmi that Rabbi Yochanan, he says you don't need al b'samach, but in the case of the Taida, if it's outside of Yerushalayim, it's still not mekadosh. So therefore, you can say from similarly by the case of the chametz that also when you're over, it doesn't have to be in the Azara, but it has to be in Yerushalayim. Elamai, we see over here that they argue in that case. So the machlekes over here, there has to be another basis for this machlekes, because otherwise they wouldn't have to teach us this over here. Ella, what we should say the machlekes over here is Ella b'hasra safek kameflik. Rather, let us say the machlekes is if asra safek, if it's uncertain, is that shmei asra or not. In order to give malchus, the Bezdin doesn't give malchus unless the person being over had warning, had asra first. If it's a safek, if they gave the warning, but there's a doubt about it, is that considered to be a valid hasra or not? So for instance, in this case over here, how can they warn the person, don't shecht the korban? How can they warn the person that you'll be over if you're part of this chabura, and they're doing the avodah and the shechting the korban or doing the zrikan the korban, you'll be over, that you'll be over if there's chometz? How can we say that you'll be over? How can we say that we don't know that if there's chametz? If the chametz is here and we see the chametz, so it's present in front of us, we see it, then we can say that, oh, if you shech the korban, if you do the avodah with the korban, then you'll be over and you'll get malchus. But if we don't see the chametz, we don't know, so it's a safek. Perhaps the person still has the chametz, perhaps not. Perhaps it got destroyed, perhaps it got removed. So it's a safek. So therefore, Reish Lakish says, unless it's in the Azora and you can see it, and you know there's chametz, you can't give a proper asra. And Rav Yochanan says that asra safek shmei asra, and it's a valid hasra regardless, and therefore, even if it's not in the Azora, there still would be malchus. So, what we know about this also, they argue on this case as well. The case of asra safek. The Itmar we learned shua shayachol kigazuyim. If a person makes a shua and he says a shua that he's going to eat this bread today. So he made the shua of Avrayam v'lo yachla. The day passed and he did not eat it. Rabbi Yochanan Rishon and Lakish Amr Tavaya, they both say ein aloika, there's no malchus. Rabbi Yochanan Amr ein aloika, he says there's no malchus. Why? Mishum dahavle lav shein bo ma'isa. Because you can only get malchus where there's an action. Allah shein bo ma'isa. Now what happened over here? The person did a non-action. He didn't eat it. So his violation is over by not doing something. That's a lav shein bo ma'isa. There's no malchus. V'chol lav shein bo ma'isa ein loiken alav. Aval asra savik shmei asra. But if not for that, it would be a valid hasra, and there would be malchus. It's only because there's no mice over here. Roshim ben Lakish Amar ain't like he says there's no malchus. Why? Mishum dahavle asra safek. He says no, not because of lav shein b'maisa. He says because it's asra safek. It's not a definite warning. We'll explain why in a minute. Asra safek lo yishmei hasra. Aval lav shein b'maisa loikin. It's only because it's asra safek, not because of lav shein b'maisa. So that can't be the basis of the machlekes here, because they wouldn't have to tell us that, because we know this already, because they argue in that case of shua. Now, why is the case of shua asra safek? So Rashi explains, because they can't give him a valid asra, because they give him asra, they have to give it to him before the day is over. Because the violation is only once the day passed and he didn't eat it. Well, if they give him a straw, they have to give him a straw before the day passes, because there still has to be time for him to not to be over. So before the day is over, they have to be able to warn him and say, you must eat this now, you must eat this bread now, because if you don't eat it, then you'll get malchus. Well, how can they give him a hasros vadai and say, you must eat it now, because if not, you get malchus? Maybe he'll eat it a little later. So, and therefore, it's hasros safek. Taisus argues on that, and he says, it's not an issue of, and it's not relevant whether the person giving the hasra knows or not. It's the person receiving the hasra has to know. And this person, well, if he received the hasra, then he knows that if he doesn't eat it, if he doesn't eat this bread before the end of the day, he'll get malchus. So Taisus explains rather that the pshat is it's hasra safek because it's a safek because the person could think and always say, Shegeg ayisi. Yes, I received the hasra, and I know I have to eat it before the end of the day, but I figured I'll still have time, and I'll be able to do it later. And therefore, he didn't intend, he could say, I was a Shegeg, I really intended to eat it, and I didn't realize that the day was over, and I didn't have the opportunity. So that's why it's a hasra safek, because you can always say that I didn't have a definite warning because I thought I would be able to eat it later. He says perhaps that Rashi means that as well. So, Amri, so therefore, what is the machlekes over here? What is the basis of the machlekes? Amri la'olam v'la'al b'somuch kamifli. So the Gemara is now returning to the original explanation of the machlekes, and it's not because of hasra safek or not. Agav, Taisus is medayik. Rav Yochanan says hasra safek leishmei hasra. So therefore, we said originally that you're not chayiv unless there's chometz. The sheikh and the zerk hayichem b'nei chabura. The mashmos from Rashi is that if one of the b'nei chabura has chometz, then the b'nei chabura are also chayiv. Taisus is medayik. How can you say that? For them, it's a lav shein b'maisa. So therefore, we said chayiv. It means the one the sheikh or the zayir is chayiv if there's chometz, he has chometz, or echem b'nei chabura. But the b'nei chabura are not chayiv because according for them it's a lav shein b'maisa. So they can't be chayiv. And also Taisus says the pasuk says that lo yisishchayil al chometz dam zivchi. So that it's referring to the one the sheikh the zayir. So therefore, Taisus argues on Rashi. Al Kapanim Gemara says, Amri la'olam ba'al b'samuch kamiflgi. The basis of the machlokes is ba'al b'samuch. Why do we need this over here? Why do we need to argue both in this case and by the case of the Taida? I need both. If there's only, you told me the machlokes by chometz, avamina bahu the kamer of Yochanan, the loy being a ba'al b'samuch. I would have thought by chometz, there you don't need ba'al b'samach, even if it's not in the Azora. Why? Mishum de Isru. Because it's an Isru. So wherever it is, if you're shechting and there's chometz, you're over. Why does it have to be close? But to give it kedusha, the case of the Taida, to give it kedusha to lechem, kedusha zaguv, like kodesh ela bifnim. I would think it's only kodesh bifnim, where it's in the Azora. So I might have thought that he would agree that it has to be in the Zohar. The Isa Gavoy Kodesh, Eloi Loi Kodesh. I would think it has to be inside, it has to be inside the Zohar. Only then it can give it the Kedusha. But outside it can't. Mididava Klishoras. Just like by a Klishoras, that it's makdish things that you put in the Klishoras. So a person he's makdish flour for a mincha, it has Kedushas Domim. What gives it Kedushas Aguf? Putting it in the Klishoras. I would have thought over here also that it has to be give Kedusha to the Lechem, it has to be inside. It has to be in the Azorah. Tzricha. Therefore, it's necessary to tell me that in the case of the Taida as well, that Rav Yochanan says it doesn't have to be inside. That's the way Rashi explains it. Taisus argues on that because he says in the Kli Shares, it's the Kli that gives the Kedusha. Over here, it's not the Azora that gives the Kedusha. It's the Shchita that gives over here, it's the Shchita that's Keveya. It's the Shchita that gives it the Kedusha. So why would I say that, why would I say that it has to be in the Azara? So Tosfos therefore explains, even by the Mincha, it only gives it Kedusha if it's in the Azara. I mean, even though it's putting it in the Kli Sharas, but it has to be in the Azara. If it's not in the Azara, it's only when the Kli Sharas is when it's in the Azara. If it's not, doesn't give it Kedusha. So therefore here also I would think that it only gives it Kedusha if it's in the Azara. So the Gemara continues, now and if you only told me the case by the Taida, I would have said, ben Lakish, I would have said that Dafka over there, he said the Binan al Samach. I would have thought that only Dafka there you need to be al Samach, that we say the Isa Gavai Kaddish Eloi Kaddish, that because it has to be near, it has to be inside, like the case of the Kli Sharas. But I might have thought of a Linyan Chometz, but you might have said that Rosh ben Lakish would be Maida Leila Rav Yochanan Deloi Bin and Al Samach. Then we might have thought that in this case by the Chometz he would agree. You don't need Al Samach. The Isur Chol Hecha the Isa. It doesn't give the Kedusha. It's being over in Isur, and therefore wherever it is, you would be over the Isur. That's why it has to tell me in both cases. If the Sheikhet doesn't have the chametz, what's the din? So we already learned this, but he didn't know of this halacha, so he asked a question. He said, it says miksiv loisishchet al chametzcha. Doesn't say don't shecht it if you have chametz. Loisishchet al chametz. It says chametz, not dafke your chametz. Therefore, even if it doesn't belong to the Shaykh, even if it belongs to Echem Dei Chabura, he would be Chayim. Well, then even if it doesn't belong to the Shaykh, the Zorak, or even Echem Dei Chabura, as long as somebody in the world has Chametz, maybe you'll say here, Oiver. Amalei says no. It says, so we make a connection between the Isser of Leisishchan al Chametz and not leaving not be having Alana, not leaving the Korban over to the next day. So we make a connection to it. It says Leisishchan v'lo Leisishchan al Chametz Hanach Dekaima Lamishum lo Yolen. Where is it that there is an Isser of having Chametz, to whom that Masid belong to those that have an Isser of not leaving the Korban overnight? So therefore, only those who are either doing the avodah of the korban, or who are part of the chabura that are yaitza with the korban, they have the responsibility to make sure the korban is not left overnight. For them, if they have chametz, any of that group, then the isser of loisishchat applies. Amar Rav he says Hilka Koina Maktir Sachelev Oiver B'Leis Hasa. He says therefore we can be medayik from here that the Kohen who's Maktir the Chelev, he's Oiver B'Leis Hasa, Hovi Yesh Lo B'Chlal Halon Say Murim. Since he's B'Chlal Halon Say Murim, that it applies to him as well, even though it's not his korban. And he's not part of the Chabura, he's not Yosef with his korban, but he is doing the Haktor of the Chelev, and he's not even doing the Shchita Zrika, he's not even doing one of the avodas of the korban, but still, he's putting burning the fats on the Mizbeach, so he has the Achrayas of making sure that there's Loyolin, so therefore, as far as him also it applies, he also then has this Isser of that Loy Sishad al Chametz. Rashi says the case is talking where nobody had Chametz except the Maktir. Because if other people had the Chametz of the Sheikhet and the Zayrik or the Bnei Chabura had Chametz, then the Korban would already be possible from beforehand. So therefore the Maktir, there would be no din of putting it on the Mizbeach, there was no din of that Loyolin, because it would be a korban that's possible. It doesn't go on the Mizbeach. The Tzlachas Medayik, we see from here that Rashi does not hold up tais like Taisus. We learned before that Taisus held that if a person has chometz, the Sheikh L'Zarga Echem Nechabur, if they have chometz, you're over on the lav of Leisishchan al Chometz Dav Zivchik. But it does not passel the korban. From here we see that Rashi learns not like that. He says that you're over the lav, and it also possible to korban.